Gutter! It's a gutter! It's just a gutter. I mean, dirt.
Now, several years ago, I was flying from New York City to Charleston, West Virginia, which means I was on my way to Atlanta. So I got on the airplane, and I'm not superstitious in all aspects of my life, but in some aspects of my life, I am very superstitious. Like one time, I cut my hand, I cut it really bad, and I had to go to the doctor, and I got 13 stitches. And I looked at this grievous wound, and I said to the doctor, I said, Doc, you either got to put one more stitch in, or you got to take one out. And she said, how come? And I said, because 13 stitches is bad luck. And she looked at the wound, and she said, don't you think you've already had the bad luck? And I said, you can't be too careful. So, when I fly, or when I used to fly, or when I fly again, I have a very strict ritual that I go through. What happens is, I fly just enough that I get to sit in the exit row. I have just that many miles that I am permitted to sit in the exit row. And so I go in, and I sit down, and I take my little bag, and I put it under the seat in front of me. And invariably, the person in front of me turns around and says, the strap of your bag has invaded my personal space. So I have to pull the strap back just a little bit. And then what I do is I get out the in-flight magazine and I turn to the back where they have the Sudoku puzzle. And I have to complete the Sudoku puzzle before the plane takes off, or I know that we just won't make it to where we're going. And I have to tell you that another thing that happened to me during the whole coronavirus thing is I did have to fly a couple of times, and they had taken all of the in-flight magazines out of the airplane, so there was no way to do the Sudoku puzzle. And I made it safe on every one of those flights, and you might say to yourself, well, Bill, that just proves that you don't have to do the Sudoku puzzle to fly safely. But it also might just prove that if there is no Sudoku puzzle, then the superstition doesn't apply. And I don't want to take any chances. So the next time I get on a plane, I'm doing the Sudoku puzzle. But what also happens when you fly and you sit in the exit row is the flight attendant will come back and they lean into the exit row and they say very sincerely, are you aware that you are sitting in the exit row? And you have to answer verbally. You have to say yes. And then they say, are you willing and able to help in the event of an emergency? And you have to respond orally. Now, when this policy was first instituted some years back, you had to say yes. They were very serious about it. But now, as long as you answer verbally, they're happy. So I usually say something like Pop-Tarts. So I got on this particular airplane and I sat down and I put my bag under the seat and I pulled the strap back a little bit, and the flight attendant came down the aisle before I could get the in-flight magazine out, and she said, are you aware that you're in the exit row? And I said yes, and she said, are you willing to help? And I said Pop-Tarts, and she walked away and we were all happy, and I turned to the back of the in-flight magazine and some inconsiderate person had already completed the easy Sudoku puzzle, which meant that I was going to have to complete the difficult Sudoku puzzle before the plane took off, jeopardizing the lives of every person on that plane. And even though we were at LaGuardia, where you have to taxi for about 6.5 hours, I did not complete the Sudoku puzzle before we took off. So I took the magazine, I put it back in the seat pocket in front of me, and I laid back, put my head back so that I could go to sleep, because I knew something bad was going to happen and I didn't want to be awake when it happened. You know, like when the plane's dropping 30,000 feet, I want to wake up maybe a foot off the ground and be like, huh, what? Like that. I don't want to know that it's happening the entire 30-foot descent. So I put my head back and I went to sleep. And I don't know exactly how long we'd been in the air when the intercom woke me up. And it was the pilot. You can always tell it's the pilot. Doesn't matter if it's a male pilot or a female pilot. They always start the exact same way. They want to let you know that a competent, reasonable, intelligent person is in charge of this hurtling metal tube flying through the sky with 300 lives on it. So they always start out the same way to give you that sense of security. They go like this. They go, and then they sort of chuckle. To let you know that no matter what they're about to say, it's inconsequential. So I heard the, and I woke up, and the pilot said, this is the pilot speaking. I just thought I'd let you know that the plane that took off after us at LaGuardia, Well, they saw some debris on the runway. We might have blown a tire. But don't worry about it, because we got lots of tires, and there's no light in the cockpit indicating that we have a flat tire. So just lean back and enjoy your flight. And I thought to myself, I could enjoy my flight a whole lot better if I didn't know we had a flat tire. And then I thought to myself, he said that there was no light indicating that there was a flat tire. And I wondered if that meant that the light that indicates there's a flat tire was not illuminated, or if simply no one had ever installed a light to indicate that there was a flat tire. And I thought, well, nothing I can do about this. I'm just going to go back to sleep. So I was putting my head back when the flight attendant came down the aisle, and she leaned in. Now, I was the only person in this particular exit row, and she leaned in very close and very sincerely, and she said, "Do you remember how, before we took off, you said that you would be willing and able to help in the event of an emergency?" And I thought to myself, I did not say that. What I said was Pop-Tarts. But I acknowledged that, yes, that had been the intent of my pastry statement. And she said, "Good, because we do have a flat tire, and it's on your side of the airplane. Would you be willing to help?" And I thought to myself, why don't you just call AAA? And then it occurred to me that AAA, you have to give them an exact location. And 15 minutes out of Atlanta at 30,000 feet is not an exact location. So I said to her, yeah, sure, I'd be happy to help. What can I do? And she said, "Would you be willing to change the tire?" And I thought, well, changing a tire? Sure, that's in my skill set. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And she said, "Would you like the operator's manual?" And I said, what any male would say in this situation, I said, I don't need no operator's manual. I've changed the tire before. So I reached over and I punched out the plexiglass in the emergency door. I've always wanted to do that. And I pulled the lever and I lifted the door as instructed and set it on the seat next to me, and the ramp shot out of the emergency exit. And I slid down the ramp and I looked, and sure enough, the landing gear was down and one of the tires was flat. So I climbed back up the ramp. I went down the aisle to the cockpit. I went in the cockpit. Now, a lot of times when I'm writing a story, I get to a point where I say to myself, the audience is not going to believe that. And this is how far I got in this particular story before I thought you might not believe it. But anyway, just hang with me. I went in the cockpit and I knelt down between the pilot and the co-pilot seat, and there's a little console there, and I gave them each their cup of coffee that was in the console, and there were some empty CD cases and a bunch of empty gum wrappers and about $1.27 in pennies. I moved all that stuff, and then I flipped the carpet back, and underneath the carpet between the driver's seat and the passenger seat there, or the co-pilot, or the pilot and the co-pilot, you know what I'm saying, there's a little lever, and I popped up that lever, and I started to crank that down counterclockwise, because I knew that that would lower the spare tire on the cable beneath the plane. And then I asked the pilot if I could have a headset, and he gave me the headset, and I went back down the aisle. I went back out the exit door. I got up on top of the airplane. I walked all the way to the back, and I popped the trunk. And there, in the trunk of the airplane, was, like a set of golf clubs, an incomplete socket set, some umbrellas and jumper cables, the jack, and the tire iron. I just took the tire iron. You don't need the jack when you're at 30,000 feet. Then I walked back down the airplane, slid down the ramp, I got on the headset, and I said to the pilot, I said, go ahead and roll her over. And the pilot said, "Roll what over?" And I said, "Go ahead and roll the plane over." And he said, "Why would I roll the plane over?" And I said, "So I can stand on the wing so I can change this tire." And he said, "Negatory on the rollover. We just serve drinks to the folks in first class." And I thought, well, that makes sense. Can't have them spilling their drinks. They have more miles than I do. So I had to come up with some other way to change this tire. Now, generally, when I change a tire, what I do is I put the tire iron on one of the lug nuts at about, an angle, kind of like that. And then, so this part, my elbow, say, is on the nut, and this is the top of the wrench there, and I'll put a foot on the top of the wrench, and then I would just push down on it with my foot. Sometimes you got to get both feet on there, because, sometimes they put those lug nuts on really hard, and you get both feet on there, and then it goes like that, and the whole thing just starts to sort of, angle down, and your feet slide off and you hit the ground. which works just fine when you're on the ground. But I didn't think it was going to work at 30,000 feet. So what I had to do was I had to put the tire iron on one of the lug nuts at more of an angle like this, and then I got in the wheel. It's a big wheel. I got in the wheel and I pushed my back against this side of the wheel, and then I put my foot on the tire iron and I pushed as hard as I could. And then the other thing I do when I'm changing a lug nut, or changing a tire, is I take the lug nuts, I'll take the hubcap off, lay that on the road beside me there, and then take the lug nuts and put those in the hubcap. That way, when I step on the hubcap, I can lose all the lug nuts at once. But that wasn't going to work, again, at 30,000 feet. So I just had to put them in my pocket there. So anyway, eventually, I made my way all around the tire, and I got all the lug nuts off, and I took the flat tire, and I went back up the ramp, and I put that in the empty seat, again, next to my seat, because I figured when we got to Atlanta, they were just going to plug that, and then they'd put it right back on the plane. Then I went back down the ramp. Now, this was the tricky part. The spare tire was just sort of swinging on the end of that cable, and I had to stand on the edge of that inflatable ramp, grab that cable, and then I had to somehow, going through the middle of the spare tire, through that little ring about that big around, was, it's a piece of metal, and then it has a bolt that goes through it, and the bolt has sort of a right angle turn on it, and then it's got a nut on the end of that. And you have to take that nut off, and then you have to work that right angle bolt out of there. That's connected to the cable, and that frees the spare tire. Well, what I had to do is I had to bite the cable, and then I had to hold the spare tire in this hand and kind of reach around this way to try and undo that nut that was holding that whole thing in place. And I was thinking to myself, there at 30,000 feet, closing in on Atlanta, I was thinking to myself, if it was raining or snowing, or if there were adverse conditions at all, this would be nearly impossible. But I finally did manage to get the spare tire free of that cable, and I put it back on, I mounted it, and I put the lug nuts back on. Now, the spare tire, it was smaller than the other tires, and it had a yellow hubcap, and you couldn't go more than 55 miles an hour. But I finally got it on. I went back up. I sat down. I closed the emergency door. I didn't lock it, though, because I knew in about 10 miles I was going to have to, check those lug nuts, make sure they were still tight. And then I took the spare tire and I put it under the other seat in front of me when, of course, the guy in front of me turned around and said, "Your flat tire is in my personal space." And I didn't say anything. Didn't say anything. I just waited till he took a sip of coffee, and then I kicked the back of his seat as hard as I could. I didn't really do that. That's just a fantasy. But finally, we landed in Atlanta, and everything was fine. And I got to my departure gate to fly to Charleston, the last leg of my trip, and they announced that the flight was delayed due to mechanical difficulties. So I just walked home. Thank you very much, Sounds of the Mountain Storytelling Festival. Can't wait to see you guys live again somewhere.
We hope the festival will be back home in person next year and need your help in getting the camp ready to reopen as soon as possible for summer camps, guest groups, and special events like the festival. Please click on the link below and make your contribution toward the work, the fun, and the fellowship that find a home at Camp Bethel. Thanks for watching, and thank you for your gift.